Racist man in a MAGA hat confronts Zohran Mamdani live, but his response completely disarms him. We have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of this month. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and become part of our dream too. The studio lights were so bright they almost erased the audience. From the stage, all Zohran could see were silhouettes, outlines of faces, the glint of phones, the vague shimmer of eyes reflecting the glow of the cameras. Above him, giant screens displayed the show's logo, America at a Crossroads, live town hall. The host, a polished anchor named Maya 11, smiled into the main camera as the countdown hit 0. Good evening, New York, she began, her voice smooth, practiced. Tonight, we're asking a simple but urgent question: can this country still talk to itself? She introduced Zohran as a lawmaker known for uncomfortable truths and unapologetic compassion, a phrase he still wasn't sure was meant as praise. He adjusted his blazer, took a breath, and let the noise of the room wash over him like a wave he'd already decided not to drown in. From the third row, Derek Hale watched with narrowed eyes. His red MAGA hat sat low on his forehead, shadowing his brow, but not his expression, a mix of anger, exhaustion, and something darker he would never call fear. Derek had come here with a mission. He'd told his friends in the parking lot, "I'm gonna expose this guy." Live. In front of everyone. For months, he'd watched clips of Zohran on social media, calling out racism in policing, defending immigrants, insisting that America owed more to the people it had pushed to the edges. To Derek, it sounded like betrayal. "Always blaming people like me," he'd muttered at the TV. "Never them." When the network opened submissions for live audience questions, he'd sent 3, all of them laced with grievance disguised as concern. To his surprise, the producers had picked one, his, and given him a seat with a clear camera line. "We want honest voices," they'd said. He smirked. "You're about to get one." The first half of the program rolled by in predictable beats, questions about housing, healthcare, policing. Zohran answered calmly, weaving stories of real people into every policy point. Some audience members nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. The control room, hidden behind a wall of glass, hummed with activity as producers switched between camera angles, zooming in whenever someone's face showed emotion. Ratings, they knew, lived in reactions. During a commercial break, Maya leaned toward Zohran. "Ready for the audience segment?" she asked. He gave a small half-smile. "I'm always ready," he said, though they both knew no one ever truly was. Beyond the stage, a producer moved through the crowd, checking that the pre-chosen questioners were still in their seats. She paused by Derek, lowered her headset mic, and whispered, "You're up second. Remember to speak clearly. We're live everywhere." He nodded, feeling adrenaline surge through him. This was it. The show returned from break with a burst of music. "We're back with Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani," Maya announced. "Now it's time to hear from you at home, and from our live audience." She turned toward the crowd, gesturing. "We have Derek from Staten Island." A spotlight swung, landing squarely on Derek's hat, making the red seem almost fluorescent. The camera zoomed in. Screens across the country filled with the image of an angry man in a MAGA cap rising to his feet. He took the handheld mic from the usher, cleared his throat, and locked eyes with Zohran. "Yeah, I got a question," he said, voice edged with challenge. "Why do you hate people like me so much? Why do you call us racist just for loving our country? You stand up for everyone else, but when do you stand up for us?" The room tensed. Producers leaned forward. Clickbait headlines were already writing themselves in their minds. And for a split second, everything went very, very quiet, the kind of silence that decides what kind of night it's going to be. Zohran could feel the weight of 1,000 unseen viewers pressing against his next word. One wrong sentence and he would be clipped, mocked, and weaponized before the show even ended. But instead of rushing, he inhaled slowly and walked toward Derek, not close enough to invade his space, but close enough that they were no longer just symbols across a room. They were two men having a conversation. He studied Derek's clenched jaw, the thin sheen of sweat at his temple, the way his fingers gripped the microphone like it was a lifeline. This isn't just anger, Zohran thought. This is pain that learned how to shout instead of cry. He nodded once, respectfully. "Thank you for asking that," he said calmly. And somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered, "Here we go." For a moment, Derek didn't understand why Zohran thanked him. He had expected defensiveness, maybe even anger, something he could fight with, something that matched the fire in his own chest. But Zoran's calm acknowledgement disarmed him before a single argument was made. The studio quieted even further, the air shifting as the cameras adjusted, zooming in on the two men now standing only a few feet apart. Zohran let his hands rest lightly at his sides, open, giving no impression of hostility. "You asked why I hate you," he said softly. "But I want to start by saying this, I don't." Derek frowned, taken aback. His grip on the microphone loosened. Zohran continued, "I don't know you, Derek. I don't know your story. And I would never call a man racist simply for loving his country. What I do challenge," he said gently, "is the belief that loving your country means fearing everyone outside of your own reflection." Derek's jaw twitched. "That's not what I'm saying," he muttered, but the conviction had softened. Zohran nodded. "Then help me understand," he invited. "Because your question, the one you asked on live television, didn't come from nowhere. You're not angry at me. You're angry at something else. Something older. Something deeper." The audience shifted in their seats, surprised by the direction. They'd been primed for a fight, the kind of explosive viral moment talk shows dream of. Instead, they were witnessing a man trying to understand another man's wound. Maya Levin watched closely from her seat, eyes flicking between them and the camera feed. She knew authenticity when she saw it, and she knew rating spikes when she felt them. Tonight, she was getting both. Zohran took another step, still respectful, still measured. "When you say people like me, Derek, what does that mean to you?" Derek swallowed hard. No one had ever flipped the question back on him, not like this. On social media, he argued through screens. In bars, he shouted with people who already agreed. But here, in front of millions, he felt suddenly exposed. "I mean, people who weren't born here," he said slowly. "People who come in and act like they deserve everything. While folks like me, we gotta fight for scraps. Nobody helps us." His voice wavered, surprising even himself. "People look at me like I'm the enemy. Like I'm trash." A ripple moved through the crowd. This wasn't the caricature they expected, not a hateful monster, but a man who felt discarded by the very country he was trying to defend. Zohran nodded again, deeply, as if Derek had just shared something precious. "Thank you for telling the truth," he said. "That right there, that feeling of being forgotten, that is real. And you're right. Too many Americans feel it." He paused. "But here's the thing, Derek, immigrants didn't forget you. Muslims didn't forget you. People of color didn't forget you." He tapped his chest gently. "Your government did." The words landed like a quiet explosion. Derek blinked, searching Zoran's eyes for mockery, but found none. Only conviction. "You're mad at the wrong people," Zohran added softly. "And the people in power rely on that. They profit from it. They keep us fighting each other so we never look up and see who's really pulling the strings." Derek opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback prepared. The audience watched him with a strange kind of tenderness, like they were witnessing a crack forming in a wall he'd spent years building. Zohran leaned back slightly, giving him space to breathe. "You came here to confront me," he said. "And I respect that. But I'm asking you to consider this, maybe we're on the same side, and you just never had the chance to see it." Silence followed, thick and electric. Even the control room was still. Nobody dared cut to commercial. Derek looked down at the microphone in his hand. His fingers trembled. For a long moment, he didn't say a word. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't know what to believe anymore." And Zohran, without condescension, without triumph, answered, "Then let's figure it out together." It was the first moment in the whole broadcast where the audience didn't want the confrontation to end, they wanted to see what came next. The studio lights seemed to dim around Derek as he stood holding the microphone, his knuckles pale. For years, he'd worn the MAGA hat like armor, a symbol, a shield, a warning to anyone who might challenge him. But under the glare of the cameras, and under the quiet weight of Zohran's sincerity, it began to feel less like protection, and more like a burden. The audience watched him closely, their breathing almost synchronized, as if they were witnessing something delicate, something fragile. Derek shifted uncomfortably. Sweat gathered at his hairline. He raised a hand to his cap, not even consciously, a small, instinctive gesture, but when his fingers touched the brim, he froze. Removing it would feel like betrayal. Keeping it on suddenly felt like hiding. And for the first time in years, hiding didn't feel strong. It felt suffocating. Zohran saw the subtle hesitation, the way Derek's shoulders sagged just slightly, as though some invisible weight had slipped loose. He didn't push. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, allowing space, real space, for Derek to choose who he wanted to be in that moment. "You know," Zohran said gently, "I don't need you to change your politics tonight. That's not why we're here. I just want you to stop fighting shadows. To see the people you think are your enemies as human again." Derek's eyes glistened. He blinked rapidly, angry at the sting, angry at the vulnerability. "You don't understand," he muttered. "My whole life, nobody listened. Not teachers, not bosses, not politicians. Everyone talks about helping people, but it's never us. Never the ones who barely scrape by." His voice cracked. "So yeah. Maybe I got angry. Maybe I held onto things because they made me feel like somebody finally cared." A murmur spread through the audience, not judgment, but recognition. Maya, the host, leaned forward slightly in her chair, caught off guard by the rawness of Derek's confession. The control room scrambled to adjust angles, capturing every tremble of his hands, every flicker of emotion crossing his face. Zohran nodded again, slowly. "I do understand," he said. "More than you think." He extended his hand, palm open. "Let me show you, not with arguments, not with slogans, but with truth, that caring about others doesn't mean there is less care left for you." Derek stared at the hand. A lifetime of walls pressed against him. Then, with a deep, shaky breath, Derek reached up and removed his MAGA hat. The audience gasped softly, not because of politics, but because it felt like they were witnessing a man stripping off a piece of his armor in front of millions. Derek didn't throw it. He didn't crush it. He simply lowered it respectfully by his side, as though acknowledging what it had meant while finally admitting what it had cost. His hair, flattened beneath the cap, fell awkwardly over his forehead, making him look suddenly younger and painfully human. Zohran stepped closer and placed a steady hand on Derek's shoulder. Not as a victory gesture, not as dominance, but as connection. Derek's chin trembled. "I'm tired," he whispered, the microphone barely catching the words. "I'm so damn tired of hating everyone." The audience exhaled collectively, some wiping tears. Maya covered her mouth, stunned. In the control room, someone whispered, This is history." And in that moment, under lights, under pressure, under the scrutiny of millions, Derek Hale, the angry man in a red hat, didn't look like an opponent or a threat. He looked like a man who had finally admitted his pain out loud. The hat hung loosely in his fingers, no longer a weapon. No longer a definition. Just fabric. The confrontation everyone expected had transformed into something entirely different, something no one could have predicted. And the night was only just beginning. The cameras zoomed slowly, almost reverently, capturing Derek as he stood bareheaded under the heat of the stage lights. Every director, every producer, every technician in the control room leaned closer to their screens, not wanting to miss a single nuance. This was no longer a political debate. It was something raw, unpredictable, and profoundly human. Maya sat frozen in her chair, her script useless now. She sensed what everyone else sensed. The moment had shifted from confrontation to revelation, and the entire country was watching it unfold live. Just as Zohran was about to speak again, a voice suddenly erupted from the back of the studio. "This is all manipulation." A man stood up violently, gripping the railing of the last row. Another MAGA hat. Another angry face. His name, though no one knew it yet, was Cole Matthews, a friend of Derek's who had come with him but hadn't been selected for a question. His eyes burned with indignation. "Don't fall for it, Derek. He's turning you into a pawn. They always do this." The outburst shattered the fragile silence. Audience members turned, startled. Security stepped forward but hesitated. The cameras were rolling. The network couldn't afford a physical altercation on live television, not yet. Derek whipped around, stunned. "Cole, don't." But Cole wasn't listening. He pointed at Zohran with a trembling finger, his voice echoing off the studio walls. "You people always play the victim while calling us evil. You want to take everything we built. You want to replace us." Gasps rippled through the audience. Whispered outrage swelled into a tense hum. Maya gestured subtly to the producer, who mouthed, "Keep rolling." Zohran did not flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't speak over Cole. Instead, he stepped toward him, slowly, deliberately, the way one approaches someone standing too close to the edge of a cliff. "What are you afraid will be taken from you, Cole?" he asked gently. The question hit harder than any accusation. Cole blinked, thrown off balance. "Everything. Our jobs, our pride, our place in this country," he shouted. "We're being pushed out of our own home." The studio fell silent again. Zohran's expression softened, even more than before. "You think newcomers want to replace you," he said, "but most of us, just want to stand beside you. Not in front. Not behind. Beside." Cole scoffed, but there was uncertainty there now, cracks in the fury. Zohran continued, his voice calm, unwavering. "You fear being forgotten. Derek fears it too. Millions of Americans fear it. But listen to me, fear doesn't make you evil. It makes you human. What you choose to do with that fear, that's what defines you." The audience absorbed the words slowly, like warm light after a long night. Cole clenched the railing harder, chest heaving. "Then why do you call us racist?" Zohran took a breath. "I don't call you racist. I call racism racist. And I refuse to let it use you as its messenger." A stunned hush swept the room. Even security paused. Even Cole paused. Derek turned toward his friend, voice cracking. "Cole, he's not attacking us." Cole looked at Derek, really looked, and saw the vulnerability in his eyes. The hat in Derek's hand no longer perched defiantly on his head. The exhaustion written across his face. And for the first time, Cole hesitated. Zohran stepped forward one more time, closing the divide between them. "What if," he said quietly, "nobody is trying to replace you? What if we're trying to build a country where you don't have to carry pain alone?" Cole's breathing slowed. His shoulders dropped. And then, the moment that stunned even the network, he sat down. Not defeated. Not triumphant. Just confused. And perhaps, for the first time, open. The cameras caught everything, Derek staring at his friend, Zohran standing between them like a bridge, and an audience that was no longer polarized, but mesmerized. The country had tuned in for a fight. What they got instead was a fracture healing in real time. For a long moment, Cole sat rigidly in his seat, his breath still shallow, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the stage lights, as if he were staring into the fracture that had just opened inside him. The entire studio held its breath. Even the cameras seemed to move slower, as though afraid to disturb him. Derek watched his friend with growing unease. He had never seen Cole hesitate. Never seen him falter. Cole was the one who steadied everyone else in their group, the loudest, the hardest, the most unshakable. But now, under the glare of a live broadcast, something inside him was unraveling. Cole finally looked up at Derek, his face stripped of its earlier fury. His eyes were unexpectedly glossy, not from anger, but from something older, something he had buried beneath years of shouting. "They closed the plant, man," he muttered, his voice trembling. 600 of us gone. Just like that. My dad worked there 27 years. And then, nothing. No help. No answers. The audience shifted, some leaning forward instinctively. The confession hadn't been asked for. It had simply erupted. "I was supposed to take his job," Cole continued. "That was the plan. That was what we do. But now," his voice broke. "Now I don't know what I am." Derek's expression softened with shock, guilt, and recognition. "Cole, you never said all that." Cole gave a hollow laugh. "You never asked." Then he turned his gaze back to Zohran, not challenging this time, but pleading. "You talk about caring. You talk about systems. But nobody cared when our town died. Nobody cared when men like my father lost everything. So how can you expect me not to be angry?" Zohran stepped closer, his presence calm but grounded, like someone anchoring the room. "Cole," he said softly, "anger wasn't the problem. It's what you were taught to aim that anger at." The audience murmured again, a ripple of realization spreading through them. "You lost a future you were promised. You lost a place in the world you were taught was yours. And instead of support, instead of solutions, you were given enemies." Cole wiped his face quickly, embarrassed by the tears he hadn't intended to show. "Enemies," he muttered. "Yes," Zohran said gently. "People who look different. People who pray differently. People whose struggles were easier to see than the corporations and leaders who actually abandoned you." A single tear slipped down Cole's cheek, and for once, he didn't wipe it away. Derek reached toward him, placing a tentative hand on his shoulder. "Man, I didn't know you were carrying all that." Cole gave a bitter chuckle. "None of us talk about it. We just yell instead." Something shifted in the room, the audience felt it, Maya felt it, even the crew felt it. This wasn't politics anymore. It was the anatomy of pain laid bare, generational wounds, economic collapse, pride lost in the rubble of forgotten towns. And there, in the center of it all, stood three men, a Muslim politician, a confused supporter, and a broken friend, rewriting the script of conflict in real time. Zohran lowered himself to Cole's eye level, his voice steady, almost fatherly. "You don't have to shout to be heard, Cole. Not here. Not tonight. And not in the country we want to build." Cole swallowed hard. "But I don't know where to start." Zohran reached out, placing a firm but gentle hand on Cole's shoulder. "Start here. Start by telling the truth. Start by letting others see the real you, not the armor you carry." The audience applauded, not loud, not dramatic, but with the kind of quiet sincerity that felt like a collective prayer. And then something happened that no one expected. Cole stood. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't shout. He didn't storm out. He simply stepped forward, walked to the stage, and handed Zohran his MAGA hat. Not as surrender. Not as defeat. But as a symbol of everything he no longer wanted to carry alone. The studio gasped. Maya covered her mouth. The control room erupted in disbelief. And Derek? He broke down crying. It was clear. This broadcast would not be remembered for conflict. But for the moment anger finally collapsed, and truth stepped into its place. The moment Cole placed the MAGA hat in Zohran's hands, the studio erupted in a stunned, electric silence, the kind that doesn't happen often, even on live television. It was as if every person in that room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. Derek covered his face, overwhelmed. Maya's voice caught in her throat. The audience sat frozen, and somewhere in the control room, a producer frantically gestured to keep the cameras rolling. This was history. This was something that couldn't be scripted, manufactured, or replicated. And beyond the studio, millions of viewers across the country sat on couches, in bars, in break rooms, in airports, watching, rewinding, recording. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of Cole handing over the hat flooded every platform. Did we just witness a political conversion live? MAGA supporter breaks down, Zohran Mamdani changes everything. This is the most powerful TV moment of the decade. Hashtag surged into the top trending spots. Hashtag the moment, hashtag Zohran live, hashtag anger is human, hashtag Cole and Derek, and even hashtag hat on the stage. Commentators, influencers, activists, comedians, and political strategists all jumped in. Some mocked, some celebrated, some tried to dissect the psychology of it. But nearly everyone agreed on one thing: something extraordinary had just happened. Back in the studio, a young woman in the front row suddenly stood. She wore a hijab, soft blue, hands trembling slightly as she lifted them in a gesture of solidarity. "Thank you," she said in a shaky voice, addressing Cole. For seeing us." Her words weren't rehearsed or polished, but they hit like a pulse through the crowd. Another person stood, then another. A Jewish man with a yarmulke. A Latina mother holding her child. A middle-aged white man in overalls. A black woman wearing a Union jacket. One by one, people rose, not cheering, not clapping, just standing. A silent acknowledgement of the vulnerability unraveling before them. Cole turned, shocked. I didn't do anything," he whispered. Zohran shook his head gently. "You did," he said. "You told the truth. That's the hardest thing any of us can do." Maya finally composed herself and stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Assemblyman Mamdani," she said softly, "the world is watching this moment. What would you say to the millions of people who feel like Cole, forgotten, angry, scared of being replaced?" Zohran turned to the main camera, the MAGA hat still resting in his hands. His voice was steady, warm. "I would say this: you were never the enemy. You were the victims of a system that convinced you to hate your neighbors instead of demanding accountability from your leaders. You were told that someone else's gain meant your loss. But the truth is simpler: we rise by lifting each other. And the moment we stop letting fear divide us, we become unstoppable." The audience erupted in applause, not thunderous, but emotional, as if each clap carried its own history. In living rooms across the country, some people cried. Some sat stunned. Some shut their TVs off, unable to process what they'd seen. But most watched with a strange mixture of discomfort and hope, because deep down, they sensed they had witnessed not a political performance, but a crack in the armor of a divided nation. In Washington, politicians scrambled to react. Some condemned the moment, calling it dangerous emotional manipulation. Others praised Zohran for breaking through walls we thought were permanent. Journalists scrambled to get Cole's name. Editors rushed to rewrite front-page headlines. And in the headquarters of major news networks, executives watched the viewership numbers skyrocket. But none of that mattered as much as what happened backstage. As soon as the segment ended, Derek and Cole were guided behind the curtains, not by security, but by audience members who wanted to make sure they were okay. Cole slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Derek sat beside him, still crying quietly. Zohran approached them slowly. "You two didn't just change the show," he said. "You changed the country's conversation tonight." Cole shook his head. "I didn't want attention. I just broke." Zohran smiled gently. "Sometimes breaking is the beginning." And for the first time since the broadcast began, Cole let out a breath that didn't sound like anger, it sounded like release. The backstage hallway buzzed with chaotic whispers, producers speaking into headsets, assistants running in different directions, security standing stiff with confusion, unsure whether they should expect a confrontation or a prayer circle. The moment Cole collapsed into the chair, some staff instinctively braced for volatility. But the tension dissolved when they realized he wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't boiling. He was breaking. Quietly. Humanly. Zoran moved slowly, intentionally, as though approaching someone wounded. He pulled up a chair and sat in front of Cole, not towering over him, not lecturing, just sitting, present. Derek wiped his eyes and looked between them, his breath still shaky. "I didn't know it was this bad for you," he murmured. "We always joked about it. The plant shut down, we'll figure it out. But I didn't know." Cole let out a short, bitter laugh. "We don't talk about real things, Derek. We talk about football, gas prices, and who pissed us off on Twitter." He rubbed his eyes, embarrassed that tears kept forcing their way out. "I didn't want to look weak. My dad raised me to be tough. Stoic. You know." Zoran nodded. "A lot of men were raised like that. Taught that vulnerability makes you less." When in reality, he leaned forward slightly. Vulnerability is how you grow. It's how communities heal. It's how nations heal. Cole shook his head, but his voice softened. I didn't expect any of this." "Neither did the country," Derek whispered. "But they needed it." A producer approached cautiously. "Assemblyman, we have every network calling. They want statements. Follow-up interviews. Extended coverage." She hesitated. "We also have the governor's office requesting a comment. They want to know if you're planning to take this moment political." Zoran looked at her, bewildered, genuinely bewildered. "Political," he echoed. He turned back to the two men in front of him, real men with real grief, sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of a backstage hallway after breaking open on live television. This wasn't political. This was human. Cole wiped his face again and muttered, "People like me, we don't get moments like that. Ever." "That's why it matters," Zoran replied gently. "Because someone watching tonight who's just like you will finally see a crack in the narrative they've been fed for years. A way out." A long silence washed over them, not awkward, but settling, meaningful. Derek finally said, "You know, my dad, he used to say, when men stop yelling, that's when you need to listen. I never understood it until now." Zoran gave him a small smile. "Your father was wise." Derek swallowed. "He died thinking nobody cared what he went through. I wish he could have watched tonight." Cole looked down at the MAGA hat sitting on the table beside him. It wasn't a symbol now. It wasn't a weapon. It was a weight he was deciding whether to pick back up or leave behind. After a moment, he whispered, "I don't know who I am without all this anger." Zoran answered softly, "You're someone who finally wants to breathe." The words pierced something inside Cole he didn't know was still intact. His shoulders shook, and Derek placed a firm, supportive hand behind his back. A knock interrupted the moment. A stage assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Mamdani, the second half of the show starts in 5 minutes. The host wants to know if you'll continue the discussion, or if you wanted to move to a safer topic." Zoran didn't hesitate. "We continue," he said. "But not on a stage." The assistant blinked. "Where then?" He stood, his eyes steady, resolute. "I want them with me," he said, nodding toward Cole and Derek. "Not as props. Not as opponents. As people." The assistant stared, stunned. "On stage? Together?" "No," Zoran said. "At the table. Equal voices. Their pain matters just as much as anyone else's." Cole's eyes widened. "Why would you want us up there after everything that happened?" Zoran turned to him and answered simply. "Because you were honest, and honesty deserves a seat." Derek and Cole exchanged a look, uncertainty and gratitude swirling together. For the first time, they weren't being told what to believe, who to hate, or what role they were supposed to play. They were being invited into the conversation. Into healing. Into something bigger than anger. And none of them knew it yet. But the second half of the show would change even more than the first. When the cameras came back from commercial break, viewers expected the usual shot, Maya at the center desk, Zoran beside her, the studio audience behind them. Instead, the broadcast opened on a wide-angle frame that made millions blink in confusion. At the table, under the warm glow of overhead lights, sat three men, Zohran Mamdani in the middle, and on either side of him, two people nobody ever expected to see there, Derek Hale and Cole Matthews. No stage separation. No debate podiums. No symbolic distance. Just three chairs arranged shoulder to shoulder like old friends, or like men finally willing to see each other clearly. Gasps echoed through the studio. Maya lifted her eyebrows, stunned but adapting quickly, true professionals always did. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, forcing steadiness into her voice, "we're back, and, as you can see, this conversation is taking a very different direction." The camera slowly zoomed in on the trio. Derek looked nervous but composed. Cole looked like he might bolt, but he stayed. Zohran sat with his hands folded calmly, radiating the steady warmth that had reshaped the entire night. This, Maya continued, was not planned. "Neither was any of this," Zohran replied gently. "And that's why it matters." A murmur of awe swept through the audience. People leaned forward in their seats, sensing they were witnessing something that defied every rule of political television. The control room didn't dare cut away. Derek cleared his throat, microphone trembling slightly in his hand. I know some people watching think I'm weak or stupid for being up here," he began. "But the truth is, I don't want to be angry all the time anymore." He glanced at Zohran, then at the audience. "Tonight forced me to ask why I'm so angry. And I realized I never had an answer until now." Cole exhaled sharply, his voice rough when he spoke. "And I know some people think I betrayed them." He lifted the MAGA hat, the one he had handed over, laying it on the table between them like an object undergoing examination. "This hat was never about hate for me," he said. "It was about feeling seen. Feeling like someone fought for us. But maybe I was just holding on to something because I had nothing else left." The audience murmured again, softer this time, something like empathy flickering between strangers. Zohran placed a hand lightly on the table, near the hat but not touching it. "You both said something powerful backstage," he said. "You said you felt forgotten. And I think half of America feels that way, no matter what side they're on." He turned toward Cole. "But here's the truth, none of us are meant to face that pain alone. You weren't supposed to carry the collapse of your town by yourself." Cole swallowed hard, nostrils flaring with emotion he tried to contain. "It wasn't just a plant," he whispered. "It was seeing my dad pretend he wasn't broken. Seeing my mom take extra shifts. Seeing everything we built turn to ash. And no one cared. No one even noticed." The studio went silent. Even Maya had tears brimming in her eyes. "And that's what people need to understand," Zohran said softly. "Pain doesn't disappear just because we bury it. It comes out in anger, hate, fear, or in moments like tonight, when someone finally admits what's been hurting them for years." Derek nodded. "We're taught to blame someone. Anyone. Immigrants. Muslims. People who look different. But the truth is, the people who actually abandoned us were never in this room. They were never the ones we were yelling at." Zohran turned to the camera, to millions watching. "We can't heal this country by yelling across fences," he said. "We heal it by sitting at the same table, telling the truth, and daring to see each other as human again." The audience erupted, not in applause at first, but in an emotional hum that grew and grew until the entire studio was standing. Several people cried openly. Others held hands. Maya herself wiped her cheeks before the camera caught it. The network had wanted drama. They had expected fireworks. What they got instead was the beginning of something revolutionary. As the applause thundered, Cole leaned closer to the microphone and whispered into it, a sentence heard around the country. "I'm tired of being angry. And I'm ready to learn something new." The nation paused. The network scrambled. And Zohran Mamdani knew. This wasn't the climax. This was the turning point. Before anyone in the studio truly processed what Cole had just said, the control room's monitors began flashing red as breaking news alerts from rival networks lit up the screens. Every major outlet, conservative, liberal, international, had cut into their programming to broadcast the moment live. It wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It was a national pulse. Maya received the note in her earpiece, her eyes widening. "We're being simulcast," she whispered. "Every network is airing this conversation." Zohran glanced at Derek and Cole. "Then let's make it count." The cameras zoomed in. Millions watched. Millions leaned forward. Millions held their breath. "Cole," Zohran said gently, "you said you're ready to learn something new. What do you want people across America to understand about men like you?" Cole looked down at the MAGA hat on the table, turning it slowly with his rough fingertips. He wasn't performing. He wasn't defending. He was speaking from a place that had never been lit by cameras before. "I want them to know we're not monsters," he said. "We're scared. We're broke. We're tired. We're angry because we feel like life cheated us." He swallowed, voice cracking. "And we don't know who to blame, so we blame whoever they tell us to." The audience didn't move. They didn't blink. Derek stared at him, stunned. "Man, same here," he whispered. Then he lifted his own mic. "I want people to know that supporting a politician shouldn't be my whole identity. I let it turn into a shield because I didn't feel safe anywhere else. I forgot how to think for myself. I forgot I was a person before I was a voter." A wave of emotional shock moved through the room. No one expected this level of honesty. Not from them. Not here. Not now. Zohran placed a hand on each man's shoulder, grounding them, steadying them. He turned to the camera. "America," he said softly, "listen to these men. Not as symbols. Not as stereotypes. As voices you were never supposed to hear. The truth is simple: pain is not partisan. And neither is dignity." A collective exhale swept through the studio. He continued, "If we want a better country, we don't start with policies. We start with stories. We start with listening. We start with asking why a man like Cole had to carry the collapse of his entire town alone." Cole wiped his cheeks. Derek squeezed his shoulder. Across the country, people who had never cried at a political broadcast wiped their faces. People who had felt unseen suddenly felt seen. People who had built their identities around anger suddenly felt it loosen. Families who hadn't spoken in months called each other. Bars muted sports games and turned up the volume. Nurses watched during night shifts. Truckers listened on long roads. Veterans watched from VFW halls. Muslim families watched with trembling hope. Old factory workers watched with tears running silently into calloused palms. For the first time in a long time, America wasn't arguing. America was listening. The studio phones lit up with thousands of calls, from former MAGA supporters, from immigrants, from union workers, from single mothers, from teachers, from pastors, from construction workers, all saying the same thing. This is the conversation we needed. And then something unexpected happened. A notification blinked on every screen in the control room. The White House requests a transcript of the broadcast immediately. The staff erupted in frantic whispers, but Zohran remained calm. He leaned closer to Cole and Derek. "You started something tonight," he told them quietly. "Something bigger than all of us." Cole let out a shaky breath. "I didn't mean to start anything." "You didn't start it," Zohran replied. "You revealed it." Derek looked around the studio, overwhelmed. "What happens now?" Zohran smiled gently, not like a politician answering reporters, but like a teacher reassuring frightened students. "Now," he said, "we keep talking." And with millions watching, the broadcast wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The lights above the stage buzzed faintly as the studio settled into a tense anticipation. Everyone, the crew, the audience, the millions watching, could feel that the moment was building towards something monumental. As Zohran finished speaking, Maya pressed a finger to her earpiece. Her expression instantly shifted from professionalism to shock. Assemblyman Mamdani, she said, voice unsteady, we're receiving word that someone is calling into the studio directly, someone who wishes to speak with you, Derek, and Cole. Zohran lifted his eyebrows. Cole tensed. Derek swallowed hard. Who? Zohran asked calmly. Maya hesitated, then lifted her gaze to the camera. The President of the United States. The studio erupted, gasps, shouts, frantic movement from the crew. The control room scrambled to verify the signal. Within seconds, a secure line opened, and the speakers crackled to life. The iconic voice, unmistakable, steady, measured, filled the studio. Good evening, the President said. Not booming. Not staged. Just human. Maya stammered, Mr. President, you're live on air. I know, he replied gently. I wanted to be. The studio fell into a reverent silence. Even the camera operators froze. Every viewer across the nation leaned forward. I've been watching this broadcast from the beginning, the President continued. And I want to speak directly to three men sitting at that table. The camera zoomed slowly on Zohran, Derek, and Cole. Mr. Mamdani, the President began, what you did tonight, listening instead of fighting, is something this country has forgotten how to do. You showed us a model of courage that isn't loud, but deep. Zohran nodded, humbled. Thank you, Mr. President. Then the President's tone shifted, softening with sincerity. Derek. Cole. I heard your stories. And I want you to know this, your pain is real. Your fear is real. The collapse of your towns, your factories, your livelihoods, none of that is your fault. And none of it should have been ignored. Cole's lips trembled. Derek gripped his friend's hand. I grew up around men like your fathers, the President continued. Men who worked themselves to the bone and felt abandoned when the world changed. You're not alone. You never were. But you were made to feel that way, and that's wrong. A quiet sob echoed from the audience. Someone whispered, my dad too. And tonight, the President said, you did something extraordinary. You chose honesty over hatred. Vulnerability over pride. That takes bravery. It takes more bravery than shouting ever did. Cole wiped his eyes. Derek pressed a hand to his mouth. Then the President added something no one expected. I want to invite all three of you, Zohran, Derek, and Cole, to the White House. Not for publicity. For a genuine conversation about healing the anger tearing our country apart. The audience gasped. The control room nearly collapsed into chaos. Maya covered her mouth. Zohran looked stunned. Derek froze. Cole stared straight ahead as if he'd been struck by lightning. You don't have to decide now, the President said. But I want you to know the door is open. And it's open because tonight, you opened the nation's eyes. A pause. A breath. A silence that felt sacred. Thank you, the President concluded softly. For your honesty. For your courage. And for reminding America that the first step to healing is listening. The call ended. The studio fell into awe. For several seconds, no one moved. Then the audience rose as one, quietly, reverently, in a standing ovation that didn't explode like applause, but rose like a prayer. Cole collapsed into tears. Derek held him. Zohran placed a steady arm around both of them. And across the nation, from red towns to blue cities, from rural diners to urban living rooms, millions of Americans asked themselves, maybe for the first time in years, what if we've been angry at the wrong people? And what if healing is possible? The studio parking lot was usually quiet after a live broadcast, a few lingering fans, staff loading equipment, journalists wrapping up segments. But tonight was different. As Zohran, Derek, and Cole prepared to exit backstage, a producer rushed in, breathless. You're going to want to see this, she said. All of you. They followed her down the hallway, out through the double doors, and into the cool night air. Then they froze. Hundreds of people, maybe more, stood outside the studio gates. Not protesting. Not chanting. Just standing together. Holding candles. Holding signs. Holding each other. The soft glow of lights flickered like constellations against the dark, creating a scene so gentle and surreal it felt almost holy. A hush spread through the crowd when they realized the three men had come outside. Then someone began to clap, just one person at first, timid, unsure. Another joined. Then another. And within seconds, the entire crowd erupted into applause that wasn't loud or explosive, but deep. Healing. Human. Derek's breath hitched. What is this? A woman stepped forward, middle-aged, wearing a faded Union jacket. We saw your pain, she said. And for the first time. I felt mine too. A young Muslim girl approached next. She looked up at Cole with wide, nervous eyes. I was scared of people who wore that hat, she whispered. But tonight, I saw your heart. Cole's jaw quivered. He tried to answer, but only a soft sob came out. More people stepped forward, a former factory worker, a teacher, a veteran, a delivery driver, a grandmother, a teenage boy still in school uniform. Each of them had something to say. Thank you for being honest. I thought I was alone. You helped me understand my own father. We needed this more than we realized. You gave me hope. The crowd parted slightly, creating space where the three men stood at the center, drawn together not by agreement, but by truth. Meanwhile, in living rooms across the nation, people stared at their screens in stunned silence. Some stood without meaning to, drawn into the moment as if participating from miles away. Others called relatives they hadn't spoken to in years. Many wept, not out of sadness, but out of the strange relief that comes when a wall finally cracks. In diners, TVs played the footage on repeat. In college dorms, students gathered around laptops in disbelief. In factories, night shift workers huddled around breakroom televisions, recognizing a piece of themselves in Cole's trembling voice. In mosques and churches, the moment was replayed as a symbol of tentative reconciliation. America, for the first time in a very long time, paused. Paused from division. Paused from rage. Paused from noise. Back at the studio, a reporter stepped forward, mic in hand. Mr. Mamdani, she asked softly, did you expect tonight to become a national turning point? Zohran looked at Cole and Derek, exhausted, red-eyed, transformed. Then he looked at the reporter. No, he answered. But it shows that people don't want to fight anymore. They want to be heard. Derek nodded slowly, still absorbing the magnitude of the night. I thought everyone hated us, he whispered. Turns out, we're all just hurting. Cole finally found his voice. If I'd known people would listen like this, maybe I wouldn't have spent so many years yelling. A quiet laugh rippled through the crowd, not mocking, but warm, understanding. Someone raised a sign that read, We see you. We hear you. We're in this together. As the candles flickered and the applause swelled again, Zohran looked up at the night sky, dark, vast, peaceful, and felt something shift deep inside him. Tonight wasn't about politics. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't even about the president's call. It was about recognition, the kind that allowed a fractured country to breathe the same air again, even if just for one night. And none of them knew it yet. But this night would be remembered as the moment. America's heart started to beat again. Dawn crept over the skyline like a slow confession, brushing the tops of the buildings with soft gold. News helicopters hovered above the studio, their blades slicing the early morning quiet as reporters narrated the aftermath of what had already been dubbed the night that stopped America. The clip of Cole handing over his MAGA hat, Derek crying beside him, and Zohran's steady presence at their center had played on every major network, every hour, all night long. By sunrise, it was the most watched live broadcast in over a decade. Inside the studio's green room, the three men sat around a small table, red-eyed and silent. It wasn't awkward silence, it was the silence people share when something irreversible has happened. Coffee cups sat untouched. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages from family, strangers, reporters, politicians, activists, and even people from their hometowns. Derek finally picked his up and read one aloud. "It's from my sister," he said softly. "She said she's proud of me for the first time in years." His voice cracked, and he covered his eyes. Cole stared at his own phone in disbelief. "Guys from the plant messaged me," he whispered. They said I spoke for all of them last night." His hand trembled as he added, "I thought they'd call me a traitor." Zohran smiled gently. "Honesty isn't betrayal," he said. "Sometimes it's the first time people see themselves clearly." The door opened, and Maya entered, no longer the composed host from the night before but a woman who had cried off half her makeup. "We've received more calls than in my entire career," she said, stunned. "People from every background. Former extremists. Union workers. Immigrants. Teachers. Pastors. Even law enforcement officers." She laughed a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "I've been in broadcasting for 19 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Before anyone could respond, a studio assistant rushed in with a tablet. "You need to see this," she said. She tapped the screen and turned it toward them. It showed the front page of every major newspaper in America. Every headline centered around the same photo, Zohran's hand on Cole's shoulder, with Derek crying beside them. The conversation that changed a nation. From division to dialogue. Pain spoken, anger heard, healing begins. Cole exhaled shakily. "I didn't ask for this," he murmured. "No one does," Zohran said. "But sometimes we're thrown into the moment we were meant for." Then the assistant showed a different feed, live footage from cities across the country. Small gatherings. Candlelit circles. Community centers opening their doors. Churches and mosques hosting joint meetings. People holding signs that read, "Let's keep talking. Listening is patriotic. Healing begins with U.S." It was as though the emotional shockwave of the night before had rippled through every corner of the country. For the first time in years, people weren't screaming online, they were typing earnestly, asking questions, admitting fears, sharing vulnerabilities, searching for common ground. A producer peeked into the room. "The White House called again," she said. "They want to schedule the visit for next week." Derek turned pale. "The White House? We're going?" "Yes," the producer replied. "All three of you." Cole lifted his hands in disbelief. "Man, last week I was changing tires in a garage. Now I'm going to the White House?" Zohran laughed softly. Life changes fast when truth finally gets air. As the morning stretched on, the three of them stepped outside for fresh air. The crowd from the night before had thinned but not disappeared. A few dozen people remained, holding candles and thermoses of coffee. When they saw the men emerge, they clapped gently, respectfully, as though greeting survivors of something profound. A little girl wearing a hijab stepped forward, holding a small white flower. She looked up at Cole with shy eyes. "This is for you," she said. "For being brave." Cole's face crumpled, and he knelt to accept it. "Thank you, sweetheart," he whispered, voice trembling. Zohran placed a hand on both men's backs. "This is only the beginning," he said. "If last night taught us anything, it's that America is desperate to heal, but someone has to start the conversation." Derek nodded slowly. "Then let's keep talking," he murmured. Cole added, "Let's help others talk too." And so, under the rising sun, with the nation watching and a new chapter beginning, the unlikely trio walked forward, not as enemies, not as political pawns, but as men who had cracked open the first real pathway to healing in a long, divided country. What happened next would take months to unfold, but one thing was already clear to everyone who had witnessed the night. Healing didn't start in Congress. It didn't start in rallies. It didn't start in headlines. It started at a table between three men who finally chose to listen. If you made it this far, subscribe, leave your like, and tell us where you're watching from. Thank you, and see you next time.